Robin, welcome into the back room.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you are running for Congress in Florida's 27th district, ultimately challenging Republican Representative Maria Elvira Salazar. Should you win the primary, of course. Before we get into the campaign, give us some insight into your very impressive background.
Well, my parents are immigrants. So I'm the son of immigrants. My father is from the Dominican Republic, my mom from Ecuador. And the very first thing they did when they got to this country, they enlisted in the US Army. That's where they met, fell in love, and had my sister and me. And so that example has always stuck with me. It's been my origin story, so that at every point in my life, I've chosen to pursue public service. I was raised in Hialeah in a working class family. My father ultimately became a Spanish school teacher in the public school system. My mom, a postal server, postal mail carrier in the U.S. Postal Service, both really, really proud union members. And so growing up, seeing what they've achieved in that one generation, that's the American dream. And that was for me what inspired me to go on. I, went to high school, Barbara Goldman Senior High School there in Hialeah. Went off to college and law school. Was able to go to Harvard on financial aid and work study. And then eventually I, came back home to be a homicide prosecutor here in Miami. I did that for 7 years. And I was tapped to be a lawyer on the January 6th committee. So I worked in DC investigating the first non-peaceful transfer of power in our country's history. Since then, I've just been in my community teaching, writing, and now running for Congress because of what's going on in the country. Leaders, politicians like Maria Elvira Salazar aren't really paying attention to what people are demanding they pay attention to, which are rising costs, and instead focusing on taking away people's health care and standing by while our neighbors are deported, people without criminal histories, and being deported without due process. So I am focused on that right now.
And you've also been a political aide.
I have. I started off after college working in the U.S. House. Then I moved over to the Senate. As I said, lawyer on the January 6th committee. That was a part of a House investigation and ultimately ended up chief of staff for a member of the House. So I've had quite a number of years working in Congress, learning sort of that federal landscape.
Mm-hmm. And you're a writer?
I am. I've been a writer since I was a little boy. I have distinct memories of being on the playground. Everyone else is running around, and I was in a corner writing stories in my notebook. And so, ever since I was younger, that's been my, outlet, creative expression outlet. And I've had the amazing opportunity to publish 2 books with Hachette Books. They're fiction, one a legal thriller, one a political thriller. So that's been amazing.
And one of your books is called One in the Chamber, which is a political murder mystery, which the way things seem to be going in this country, that could end up being a nonfiction book at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, really, unfortunately, I, was working on it while I was a lawyer on the January 6th committee. And of course, when you're a fiction writer, you're seeking to entertain. But behind that, I really wanted to raise the alarm on the normalcy of political violence in our country. A lot of people in my community, which is many people who've come from Venezuela or Cuba, fled their countries because of political violence and persecution. And unfortunately, in this country, we've a little bit normalized it, given all the pardons that the January 6th insurrectionists received from the president, indiscriminately, right, folks? Everyone from people who invaded the Capitol, but to people who actively assaulted and harmed police officers, 170 such officers who were injured during the riot. So it's been unfortunate seeing that change in the thinking on political violence in this country.
And so what was the moment where, amidst this very illustrious career, you sat back and said, that House of Representatives, that bastion of congeniality and productivity and bipartisanship, I want some of that. When did you decide that this was the thing you needed to and wanted to do?
Yeah, earlier this year. I think it's been watching what everyone in the country is watching with this president and the lawlessness that has taken over. In particular, the way that folks in that House of Representatives, the Republicans, are acquiescing and standing by while he does these things, right? We have people, as I mentioned, in my community who are being plucked off the streets and thrown into a detention center in the Everglades, folks who without criminal records, folks who have contributed to this country, who have paid their taxes, who often have children who are American born. And they're getting swept up without due process. And to see my representative, because I live in this community and Congresswoman Salazar is my representative. She's my voice in Congress. To see time and time again her, compare the president to Lincoln, say that he's going to do to immigration what Lincoln was for slavery, an awful analogy, a horrible analogy, and one that shows the lack of seriousness that she has for this issue. She said the other day, he gets it, quote unquote, and that it has nothing to do with her, what the immigration policy of this country is. And to me, I figure if you don't want to do the job, then step aside. That is your job. Absolutely. To call out the president, to defend the people in your community who are being terrorized, who are being harmed actively by his policies, and certainly not to, on top of that, to add insult to injury, to vote to take away people's health care, all for the purposes of giving billionaires and corporations tax giveaways. I just seeing what my representative in Congress was doing made me angry enough to figure that I should be challenging her. Someone needs to be talking about these issues and calling her to task.
And you're a young guy, 39, right?
That's right.
Tell us why Congress needs more young legislators.
I think that, if we're going to, excite young people in this political process, they need to see people like themselves in their generation representing them. I do think it becomes very isolating. It isn't very relatable for young folks who we really want to become a part of our system, to be civic minded, to see that the only people representing them in Congress are folks who are, in their 70s or 80s. We really need to pass the torch on to a younger and newer generation. We're the ones right now who are struggling day to day, middle class families, young people trying to save enough money for a house, right? My parents, having come from impoverished countries, working class family, they were able to own a home. When I was younger in Hialeah growing up. And now people are pushing that decision later and later. They're renting for longer because housing prices are just through the roof, because they're being assaulted on all fronts in terms of gas and groceries and insurance and rent. It's far too much. And so if we have folks who are having that lived experience right now, we can actually tackle the problem instead of just seeing the same old people be up in Washington, not doing anything about it.
So let's stick with that for a second, because you mentioned affordability, and that is an issue, which is something that's propelled someone like Zoran Mamdani in New York City in the mayoral race, and it's also an issue that does really speak to the concerns of young people in America today, and others, of course. So the cost of living in Miami and surrounding areas has skyrocketed, just like other parts of the country. What specific federal policies would you pursue to tackle this housing crisis in terms of affordability?
We need to build more affordable housing units. That's going to drive the price down. So if we invest in that, if we give tax incentives to folks who are looking to purchase their first home, that'll help. There's a lot of vacant apartments, and that's the thing that's really concerning too, right? Because we need more affordable housing, but some people say there are units sitting in Brickell that are empty, and it's because they're just way too unaffordable. What we need to do is actually have housing that people can afford, and try to incentivize folks to respond to the market. There are too many privileges for folks who sit on expensive housing and don't respond to the market, right? It's not sitting vacant because of the fact that it's far too unaffordable for folks. And so if we really inject, money into constructing housing in this country, the price will go down, and that ability to have the American dream will be once again in reach.
Hmm. Tell me what your stance is on immigration reform, particularly as it impacts South Florida's economy and families.
And I know I was talking about plucking people off the streets. It's a moral question, but it's also an economic question. So if we're just being purely self-interested, imagine how much higher our prices will go when we have, these large segments of our economy, the agricultural sector, right, the backbone of our economy being, decimated because we're removing folks who have contributed so much to that economy. And again, people without violent histories, in fact, without records whatsoever, the vast majority of the folks who have been ensnared, who have been snatched up off the streets by ICE, have been people without criminal records. And so if we're looking at our economy, we need these folks to be a part, to continue to contribute to it. It is absolutely an economic issue. And so my proposal is, we fix the broken immigration system. We absolutely listen to what voters were saying in the last election, which was to secure our border and deport violent criminals. I was a prosecutor, a homicide prosecutor in particular. So I know a thing or two about making sure that violent criminals are held to account. They need to finish their sentences, and then they've lost the privilege to be in this country if they've harmed people, if they've harmed their community. But outside of that, we need to be smarter. This administration isn't smart about who it's deporting. It's sort of the way that they sort of gave the blanket check to all of the January 6th insurrectionists. It's the easy thing to do, as opposed to actually doing your job, following due process, discriminating between the folks who are violent and the folks who are contributing to this country. And that's how I would move forward with immigration.
It's not only not smart, it just seems that it's just rooted in cruelty.
Cruelty is absolutely the point, right? When we have people in cages. So Maria Elvira Salazar, my opponent, she toured Alligator Alcatraz, as it is unfortunately named, and she kept using the word cages, which they are, but without even flinching. It was not even a problem. She's like, yeah, I saw the people in cages. She said that as if it were, everyday language.
Right. Like she was at the zoo.
Exactly. Well, zoo is the perfect analogy, right? Because she mentions that, oh, they even have a little place with grass so they can exercise, right? So they can run around. It's awful,
Oh
a
boy.
nightmare. And she actually used the phrase "pretty good," that the conditions in there were pretty good. Again, cages and pretty good. When I'm a congressman, I won't be talking about human beings like that, and I certainly won't be using the word cages without flinching. That's a dark mark on our history, having that detention center where we have the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, dressing up, doing gimmicks, holding photo ops. That's not treating the issue seriously whatsoever. And that's what the American people want.
I think you're not the only one, obviously, who has those concerns, because if you look at Trump's overall approval, if you look at the fact that one of his signature issues is immigration, he's completely underwater. The majority of Americans don't buy into the cruelty. They don't buy into his immigration policies, from the deportations, the flaunting court orders, to the violent tactics of ICE, the denial of habeas corpus and due process. So, like, I think we're seeing that reflect in the polling, and how Americans are not happy with how this country, this administration right now, is handling immigration.
Absolutely. People didn't vote for this. And I don't want Democrats to take the wrong lesson from the last election and say, we need to be Republican light. We need to lean into the cruelty. We need to also be hard on immigration, or tough on immigration. We got to be tough in the smart ways, right?
Sure.
Country, we have borders, secure them, throw funding at the border, help ICE agents at the border. But the other part of the American story, the American dream, is the rule of law. It's the process that we all follow to get to a result that we believe to be legitimate. So as a prosecutor, I was happy with a guilty or not guilty, whatever the jury returned, as long as we followed the process. That's what gave it legitimacy. What those 6 men or women in Florida, 12 in most states, decided was the act of justice, right? Because that's the way our system is founded. And unfortunately, right now, it's lawlessness. It's due process being thrown out the window. And that's not at all what folks wanted. And so I'm leaning into it. I'm happy to call out the Congresswoman for standing idly by while her community is suffering, while people's TPS is being revoked. And just as you mentioned, these tactics, arresting judges, right? There was that one judge that the DOJ went after. These are reminiscent of the places that the people in my community from Venezuela and Cuba, they fled. And they're now coming here and seeing that same sort of political instability, the same sort of economic instability, right? Where you have maybe tariffs one day, tariffs off the next day. You don't know if you purchase your car today versus tomorrow might be $15,000 more expensive. Um, that's not at all what our country should be about. They left those countries to come to a place of stability, and this president and the congresswoman are standing by while instability every day is shaking us to our core.
Yeah, and it's the kind of fascist behavior that our fathers and grandfathers here in America fought in World War II and died trying to defeat. And here we are again embracing it. What are the critical differences between you and the other Democrats running? I know you got a primary coming up next year.
Well, one big difference is that I represent demographically the district. It is a 70% Hispanic district. It's actually the largest share of Hispanic people currently represented by a Republican in the House of Representatives. And I myself, as I mentioned, am Latino. But more so than that, I speak Spanish. My parents taught it to me growing up. And we got to meet voters where they are. I don't think it's enough to have our English language words be dubbed or translated by somebody else. There's a loss in the disconnect there, right? And if our voters are getting their information from Univision, Telemundo, or Spanish radio, we got to meet them there. We got to be there. We can't, we're almost forfeiting the argument by allowing the congresswoman, to spew her lies and, defend the president, her dear leader, who she adores, much like she's spoken fawningly in the past about Fidel Castro, right? This is a new sort of, wannabe autocrat that she's showing loyalty to as opposed to her constituents. That message getting out to them with no response, that is not going to make a competitive seat in this district. We need somebody who's going to talk to them, who's going to go into their communities and speak to them in the language that they feel most comfortable, both English and Spanish, of course. And that's what I bring. The other thing I'll say is, as I've mentioned, I've done public service my whole entire life and not been a politician all my career, right? This is the first seat I'm ever running for. But at every point, I wanted to serve my community by helping keep it safe as a prosecutor, by investigating, the anti-democratic plot that the president and other folks tried to execute on January 6th, leading to so much violence, being directed at both parties, Mike Pence being chanted outside the Capitol building, this dark moment in our history. That was historic. That was an unprecedented investigation that I felt very proud to be a part of. And so my whole life, I've been working on behalf of the public. And that's why I think I'd be the strongest candidate to go against the congresswoman and the most prepared to be congressman on day one.
And if you do get past the primaries and you win and you find yourself in that chamber, what's the first piece of legislation you will attempt to sponsor or co-sponsor, and why?
I would love to do more of the drug price negotiation. When we had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, Democrats were able to limit insulin, right, to $35 a month. This is life-saving treatment, and folks were having to choose between eating and their medication. That's a false choice, right? We need our seniors to be able to thrive and survive and not have to make those difficult choices. And when you have price gouging by corporations, by drug companies mainly, who have a monopoly in essence, right? There's no competition there. That's the market not working. I think the market is the solution. The market will work to lower prices or to stabilize prices. But when there's a lack of competition, that's when we got to get in there and negotiate to put some cap on these things, again, that are life-saving treatments for folks. And so I think we got to do that. You look at in Florida in particular, there's FPL, and they're introducing the largest rate hikes in history at a moment where already middle class families are paying through the roof for the electricity bill, in part due to climate change and how our planet is warming, and we're not doing anything to counteract that. Again, another moral issue, but an economic issue, because families are facing so much. And so we need to, make sure that we're not on the side of corporations. And Maria Elvira Salazar, she actually took over $27,000 from FPL lobbyists and is in the top 10 of Republicans in terms of how many donations they've gotten from that industry. And so you can imagine, whose side is she going to be on? Is she going to be on the corporation side? Absolutely. She's already shown that by voting for the big ugly bill, that she's in it to give tax giveaways, to redistribute income from the poor to the wealthy. So
I was going to ask you what you think the single most consequential vote Salazar has cast that you would have voted differently. Is it what I call the big ugly ass bill?
that's a better term. I'll let you say it though. Yeah, I think that is absolutely the worst. And it's because it is the redistribution of wealth, which is hilarious to me. And it's actually mortifying. But, I was named after Robin Hood, actually, by my then 5-year-old sister.
Really?
Yeah. It was her favorite cartoon at the time. The cartoon.
I love that your parents let your 5-year-old sister name you.
Yeah,
That's
there
pretty
you go.
awesome.
Yeah, it's probably because they figured she had a better handle on the English language. And so they were like, let's get a name.
It could have been worse. You could have been, your name could have been Deputy Dog.
Exactly. I appreciate her taste in cartoons. Because it's a good movie. It's a good cartoon. So Robin Hood, right? And what does Robin Hood do? He steals from the rich to give to the poor. The Congresswoman is basically Robin Hood in reverse. She steals from the poor to give to the rich. The CBO just came out with a study. All the bill did was make the poor poor. It made the supremely rich richer. And that's that's socialism, which I think is interesting too. In my community, we're very much against socialism, communism. We know the horrors that it has produced in the countries that we fled. And the Congresswoman is just doing the exact opposite here in this country. So that bill, it's almost like a parade of horrors, that bill, right? Because you have the tax giveaways to the billionaires and the corporations. You have the middle class getting shafted. And then on top of it, let's just throw in for fun the fact that we're going to take away people's health care, right? 100,000 people in my community will wake up without Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act from one day to the next. That's 1.9 million people in Florida overall. That's insanity. At the very least, government should do no harm, and it's actively harming its citizens.
So you mentioned this before. The district does have a large Cuban American and Latino population. You are the only Hispanic candidate fluent in Spanish. That does seem like a major advantage. The reality is Democrats have lost, in large part, the Hispanic community nationwide. So what is your pitch to win back this critical part of this traditional Democratic coalition?
My pitch is you were lied to, you were misled, and you were cheated. That was by the president, Donald Trump, but more so by people in Congress who are working in lockstep with him, like Congresswoman Salazar, right? Again, you didn't vote for uni-party control. You didn't vote for a king who gets to do whatever he wants, right? There used to be a congressional prerogative. It didn't matter the party, they're Article 1, right? They are the first the first body created in the Constitution. The president is Article 2. And they're the ones who can declare war or authorize war. And they're the ones that have the power of the purse. And what we see is complete slavishness to the president. We see the Congresswoman completely acquiescing her role whatsoever. And so I tell them, look, this is not what you voted for. You wanted people to be laser focused on prices, reducing those costs. You wanted your leaders to focus on that. Instead, they're not focusing on that. You wanted secure borders and you wanted the deportation of violent criminals. You did not want your friend, your neighbor, your colleague of 30 years who is a good, upstanding person to be swept up in vans by ICE and thrown into a detention center in the Everglades. So we're happy to have you. You were cheated, you were lied to, you were betrayed, and we need a check. We need an actual representative who's going to not work in complete lockstep with the president, who, when there's good policy, will vote for it. No tax on tips. All right, let's do it. Let's not make it expire after 3 years while all the tax giveaways for the billionaires are permanent, right? That talks about your values as to who you're going to stand up for. And let's get someone in there who, when the president is, acting like an autocrat, that will call him out, will vote against it, and will be an actual balanced government again.
So Trump did make huge gains in your district. He won by 15 percentage points in 2024 after winning by just a half point in 2020. But given the backlash overall, his chaos this year and his sinking approval, in a way, this race is as much about him as it would be about you if you are the nominee.
Well, I think it needs to be about Salazar, right? She needs to defend her record. And she's silent. She's silent while people in my community are being harmed. She hasn't held a town hall. She doesn't want to hear from folks. Her focus is completely on, as you mentioned, the president, on DC, and her back is turned to us, the constituents, and her community. I think even folks who voted for the president want to have a balanced system, want to have people in the House who are going to call them out and who are going to really look out for them and their day-to-day struggles, right? They're paying the price for the fact.
But I guess what I'm asking is, because I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
It's hard to look at Salazar or any Republican running in this country without making a direct connection to the fealty that they have to Trump, because the pitch really is, if you vote for Salazar, you're really voting for Trump, because she's just going to rubber stamp everything, or continue to rubber stamp everything that he puts before Congress.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. We need Congress people who are going to be independent, right? Again, we'll side when there's good policy that's coming out of the White House, we'll side and vote for it. But when there's bad policy, we'll actively talk against it and vote against it. So I think that's absolutely right. The incumbent needs to defend her record, and she should be fired, given how poorly she's been doing as a congresswoman.
Mm-hmm. As a former prosecutor, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on Trump's assault on democracy and the rule of law.
Absolutely. The president faced consequences, criminal consequences while he was out of office. And then the Supreme Court of the United States, in a ruling that I think shocked many of us, I think there were no legal observers who really thought that they were going to, in essence, declare that the president is above the law, right? That searing hypothetical that Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson from Miami wrote about, and where it was highly discussed, what if he ordered the military to take out his political opponent? And lawyers for the president had to say yes, because that would be an official act. Obviously, he's using the military. And the ruling that they were pursuing, and that actually Chief Justice Roberts ended up penning, was that you could not be prosecuted for any official acts, no matter how egregious. That is wild. And so what I think is most concerning is the president is doing what he always does, which is pushing the boundary of the law. He has a soft spot in his heart for dictators around the world. That's how he sees America. That's how he would love to rule America. And the truth is, the people who have been elected to be his check and balance need to do their jobs. He's going to be Trump. People voted for him, I think, because of prices, because of the economy. And what folks in Congress need to do now is stop the lawlessness. Judges in the district and circuit level have been playing that role. Alligator Alcatraz, right, the construction been paused temporarily, and we'll see if it'll become permanent. So there are people in this democracy that are standing up, that are fighting for it. And so I want people not to lose hope about that. We just got to keep fighting. The more we become apathetic, the more we'll descend into autocracy. So I'm optimistic about our future in this country.
I agree with you. My nickname is Optimistic Andy.
There you go.
Anything else you'd like to add about your campaign?
I'm just really excited to get out there and really listen to folks. She's not listening. I'm going to go to every part of the district. I'm going to go into the Republican parts. I grew up in Hialeah. It is a very Republican conservative city. I worked in a prosecutor's office, which can be a conservative workplace. And I, presented in front of juries. And when I was trying to convince them of the facts, I didn't care if they were Democrats, Republicans, or independents. I was going to meet them where they are. So that's going to be the spirit of my campaign. I'm going to meet people where they are in every community in the both languages. And we're going to win this seat back for the Democrats.
And if folks want to learn more about you and your campaign and support you, where do they go?
My website is my last name, Peguero. Peguero is P as in Peter, EGUERO for Miami.com.
Terrific. Good luck to you, and come back and keep us updated on the campaign.
Will do, Andy. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Alrighty, take care.